I'm going to take you through a game played by Bobby Fischer, the legendary American world champion, played in the Siegen Olympiad 1970. Remember to subscribe to the channel, then do click on the button below. And if you'd like to support the channel, help us keep the lights on, then do check out the links in the video description to either PayPal or patreon.com. So I've been meaning to get back to Fischer's games for some time, but it's always been a very busy time on the channel. So many top tournaments going on. But what I'd like to do is chart Fischer's progress right through to the match in 1972 against Boris Spassky. So we left, the last time I recorded a video on Bobby Fischer was during the Siegen Olympiad in 1970, where Fischer scored a superb 10 points out of 13, but he had lost to Spassky. That was a big negative. And Spassky was on tremendous form in that Olympiad as well. But I want to show you a game from the USA-Turkey match. So Fischer against İsmet Ibrahimoglu. Apologies if my pronunciation isn't very good there. Now, these players are in a different league. Fischer is much, much better than the Turkish player. But I find this game fascinating to see how Fischer takes apart his opponent. Fischer was a very strategic player, actually, and we're going to see that in this game, and it's really, really beautiful. There's a kind of clarity to his play, which is, well, I find it really beautiful, actually. So Fischer liked this kind of King's Indian attack setup. And here he's playing it against Caro-Kann. He played it also against the French. Of course, with colours reversed, he was a great exponent of the King's Indian. So it's a fairly tame start by both players. And here Black decides to give up the bishop. He is a little bit congested, and this bishop doesn't have a clear diagonal, so this is a reasonable decision. It wouldn't be to everyone's taste to give up those bishops early on. And Fischer certainly liked bishops over knights. That was a real preference of his. But I'm not going to knock this decision of Black's, because I've seen that Anand has played this in a couple of games at least. So you know it's quite possible to do this. I think at the moment you can see that light squared bishop is actually blunted by this pawn chain here, so it's not doing too much at the moment. Anand has previously, or has, I wouldn't say previously, Anand in this position has played a5 and knight a6, that's not bad. But knight d7, also played by Anand actually in another game. And here it seems logical to me to put the pawn on e5, or you could play e6 as well and just sort of construct a big brick wall against that bishop. But Black took on e4 and then played queen c7. Anand has played e5 here, which, you know, just staking a claim in the middle of the board. But Ibrahimoglu played queen c7 here, and I think that's a little bit indecisive. He probably, he wasn't exactly sure how to set up in the middle of the board. And here's an interesting decision from Fischer. How many of us in this position would play the pawn to f4 to start an initiative on the king side, or simply just to gain space? For example, Grandmaster David Norwood from England played this in the past, and in exactly this position, and won a very nice game, and I think this is a good strategy. But Fischer, he doesn't like to get his hands dirty. He likes to keep things clean. He wants to make sure his king is well protected, and starts a little bit of play on the queen side. Rook d8 from Black. I mean, there's an argument for blocking that pawn, but however you deal with that white's a pawn, it involves some kind of compromise. Knight b3, knight c4 looks like the obvious move there, but knight b3, that's the way Fischer goes. I suppose stops the knight coming to c5. And of course prepares to bring out the bishop, probably to e3, but it could come to any of those squares. b6. I'm not sure this is the best setup, because this starts to weaken those light squares. And here black decides to set up here to sort of block out the knight and block out the bishop. But those light squares are really weak. Remember, that's the extra bishop. The light squared bishop is the extra bishop. And at some moment we're going to see that white can exploit that with queen and bishop actually. So a5, already a very pleasant position for Fischer, because he has the opportunity to use the a file. And here, yeah, it's already quite tough for black. I mean, one idea would be to switch this knight to d6, but then it could be possible just to revert to a kingside attack here. At least in this case, well, that knight covers these squares, but e5 I certainly don't like. This is the game continuation, because you can see that just exacerbates all these light squared weaknesses. It does block out white, does prevent white from playing f4 and e5, but that looks like the gap between my two front teeth, I'm afraid, that square on d5, and opens up this diagonal. Ooh, it's not great. Okay, here's a nice moment. Having induced some weaknesses, now this knight has nowhere to go. So Fischer improves the position of his worst placed piece. It's possible to play knight c4 here. It's also good for white, but Fischer played knight b1 and puts it on c3, looking at these two squares. So all very, very natural. And this knight has spun around to cover these squares, fair enough. And here again we see Fischer's taste here in the position. This is a really nice position for white. Again, how many of us would think, well, this knight has disappeared from the king side, the queen is a long way from the king side, it feels very natural to advance with f5 and perhaps just to push on. But I just, thinking about how Fischer plays, he would rather just keep things very clean. You have to start calculating in positions like this. Is this any good? Can black play like this? Or maybe bishop h6. And in this case, maybe Fischer just wouldn't want his dark squared bishop to be exchanged off. Fischer kept it very simple, just playing on these light squared weaknesses on the queen side. So black is trying to defend as best he can. Look at that terrible knight on d7. Its possibilities are just blocked out, as is the bishop on g7. Queen runs in. And black has shut out white from the a file, but actually there's another file here, and I like the kind of unhurried way in which Fischer plays this. c3 is a useful move. It just controls these squares, so that if a knight ever ends up on one of these squares, then d4 is covered. So in fact, I like this, there's no rush, basically. Now black exchanges on a1. Of course, it's not necessary to play like this, but I think white can conquer the a file anytime he wants to, actually, with just by playing a move like rook a6 followed by doubling. Or white could easily just switch to the d file. It's also very unpleasant. Anyway, black exchanged and put the rook on b8. So he's trying to just construct some kind of fortress on the queen side, of course, you can't block white out in a position like this. And Fischer is just taking control. Bishop f1. Notice that pawn on f2 is still nailed to its starting square. So that means that Fischer never has to worry about his king. This is the advantage of playing as he has done in the game. Black doesn't have a sniff of counterplay here. Queen a4. Emphasizing control over the a file. You never know when that rook might be able to come in. And also, he's made room for the bishop to come to b5. And the knight comes to b8, rook a8. And here's a great moment. For the moment, black has shut out white on the queen side. But Fischer controls the game, and he's able to switch the attack to the other side of the board. And I think this is a really beautiful moment in the game. So he plays queen d1. The knight came to c6. Well, black is very, very short of moves. And now queen d2. And this just tips black over. Of course, there are other ways to play this, but queen d2, I think this is really, really nice. So you can see the threat is to play bishop h6, which would force the king out. Therefore, h5, which makes room for the king on h7. But bishop g5 anyway. I love this, that Fischer is able to exploit the fact that this bishop has come over to defend on the queen side, but it's left the king side exposed. Now, of course, this looks like a very powerful move. So the obvious response would be to play the king back to g7. But watch what happens. I'm sure Fischer would have been very aware of this possibility. Rook e8, there is a point to this, and that is to just cut out an escape for the king. So we give up this bishop. Black can defend in other ways, but I want to just demonstrate the key idea for white. And now queen h6, so you can see with the rook here, the king is not running away. And here's the basic idea, that we can check the king up the board and h4. There are other defenses, but basically that's what white is planning. Really nice, beautiful switch. So that's the position. Bishop has just come back to g5 and rook b8 played. So he's trying to shut out white's pieces again. And Fischer simply exchanges. So obviously queen takes would lose the knight on c6. So the knight takes on b8 and bishop f6. So this is complete domination by these bishops. Bishop on b5 is just bossing the knight on b8, dominating that knight. And well, this bishop as well is not very well placed at all. Knight c6 was tried here. But then queen d5 actually wins on the spot. So if the knight goes back, then we can take here, and that will lead to mate. So the knight threatened, knight came back to a7, and bishop e8, threatening this pawn. And now Fischer cashes in. It's a pity to give up two bishops, but hey, that's the end. Here, black resigned. White is already one pawn up. This one is dropping. This one is also on prise, and don't forget there are sometimes possibilities to pick up a stray knight as well with moves like this, either picking up the knight or delivering mate. So what a smooth game by Fischer. I've got to emphasize the way he played this. That king on g1, completely safe. Never advanced the f-pawn, even though it was so tempting to do so. But that was Fischer's style. He liked that kind of clarity. So beautiful. Well, there we go. I'm going to be giving you some more games by Fischer over the next few weeks when I can fit them in. But in the meantime, let me know. Have you got a favourite Fischer game in this period from 1970 to 1972 on the road to Reykjavik? Let me know. I've got my favourites that I've selected, but if you have, then do let me know. So next up, I'm going to be looking at the interzonal tournament that he played in Palma de Mallorca, and I've picked out a couple of games from there. Don't forget, check out Fischer's games in the Fischer playlist. You'll see that up there in the info tab, and also check out other playlists in the video description. It's also a Spassky playlist, of course, where, well, I've already shown you some beautiful games by the Russian world champion. Thanks for watching.